You have lived so long within the noise of others' expectations that the idea of silence feels both terrifying and liberating. When the empaths, especially those of you who carry the rare constellation of intuition and judgment, the introverted visionaries of the INTJ and INFJ, finally chooses to walk away, what speaks is not the gesture of leaving, but the silence that follows. Silence becomes the thunder of the unconscious, a roar disguised as absence, and it resounds louder than any words you might have uttered in defense of yourself. To understand this moment, we must look beneath the surface of typology and into the archetypal theater of the psyche, for here the empath's departure becomes not just a personal act, but a mythic one. The INFJ and INTJ are both children of introverted intuition, that strange, mysterious function which peers into the fog of time and pulls out patterns unseen by others. It is a gift of vision, but also a burden, for to see what others refuse to acknowledge often isolates you. The empath, too, lives with heightened sensitivity, the porous boundary that allows the feelings of others to enter and often overwhelm. When these two dimensions converge, the visionary archetype and the empathic wound, a life is created that feels perpetually pulled between knowing and suffering. To walk away, then, is not simply an action. It is a culmination of years of endurance, of absorbing shadows, not your own, and finally of recognizing that individuation demands a severing. In my work, I spoke often of individuation, the process by which the self becomes whole, differentiated from the demands of the collective and from the compulsions of the unconscious. For the empath, individuation is often delayed because their instinct is to serve others, to carry burdens that are not theirs, to remain tethered even when their spirit cries out for release. But the psyche is relentless. The unconscious whispers at first and then screams. And one day the empath awakes to the unbearable weight of silence within themselves. A silence asking to be honored. Walking away is not cruelty. It is alignment. It is the psyche insisting on balance after too many years of sacrifice. I once dreamt of a figure, pale and exhausted, standing at the gates of a city that had drained all her strength. She carried buckets of water, endlessly pouring them into the thirsty mouths of others, yet never drinking herself. Behind her, in the mountains, flowed the clear spring that could quench her thirst. The dream told me that to remain at the gate was to die of thirst in service to others who demanded more and more, to turn her back, to walk into the silence of the mountain, was not abandonment, but salvation. So it is when the empath, guided by intuition, finally withdraws from the collective noise. It is a movement into the mountain of the self, where the spring flows and individuation begins. The silence of such a departure unsettles those who remain. People who relied on the empath's endless giving are disturbed by the sudden absence, for they confront the shadow of their own dependency. The silence exposes them Words can be debated, justified, rationalized away, but silence cannot be argued with. It is an archetypal force, the void, the nothing, that reveals everything. The empath who leaves does not curse, does not defend. They vanish into the stillness, and in doing so, they mirror back the hollowness of others' expectations. This is why silence speaks loudest. It forces others into confrontation with themselves, with what they demanded, with what they consumed without gratitude. We must remember that silence is not emptiness. In the symbolic life, silence is the womb of transformation. It is the place where the seed germinates in darkness, unseen, until one day it breaks the soil as something new. When an empath walks away, they do not enter nothingness, they enter the womb of their own psyche, a fertile ground where archetypes long neglected awaken. Here the shadow emerges, not as an enemy but as a teacher. The anger, the resentment, the grief that was silenced for so long begin to find voice. To endure this is terrifying, for the empath has always feared becoming what they despised: cold, detached, selfish. Yet only by integrating the shadow can they become whole. The silence gives space for the shadow to step forward, to be seen and not denied. And in this confrontation, the empath learns they are not destroyed by their own darkness, but expanded by it. I have spoken often of the anima and animus, those inner figures of the soul that mediate between conscious and unconscious. For the INFJ and INTJ empath, these figures often appear in dreams as guides who beckon them away from unhealthy ties. A man may dream of a mysterious woman standing at his threshold, saying nothing but looking with eyes that pierce through illusion. A woman may dream of a silent warrior who turns his back on the crowd and gestures for her to follow. These are not mere fantasies. They are archetypal summons to individuation. They appear when the time has come to walk away, when silence must become the language of liberation. To ignore them is to remain chained. To follow them is to step into destiny. The act of walking away carries with it a paradox. It feels like abandonment. Yet, it is the truest form of presence to oneself. I recall patients who wept, saying, "If I leave, I am betraying love." But love that drains the soul is not love, it is possession. Empathy without boundaries becomes vampiric, where the empath becomes prey to those who cannot generate their own psychic nourishment. The silence after walking away is not absence of love, but the purification of love from codependency. It is eros returning to its rightful place, a fire that warms rather than consumes. The mystics knew this, that sometimes the most sacred word is not spoken but withheld. And in that withholding, the divine speaks louder than any human utterance. The world often misunderstands the quiet withdrawal of the empathic intuitive. They call it arrogance, coldness, or detachment, but these are projections of their own abandoned shadows. In truth, the empath's silence is a sacrifice to the self, an offering to the gods within by turning inward, by refusing to justify, they honor a deeper order of life. They remind us that individuation is not about pleasing the collective, but about obeying the call of the inner voice. Silence becomes then not a wall, but a doorway. Those who truly seek to meet the empath in authenticity will follow into that doorway. Those who do not will remain outside, murmuring in dissatisfaction. Thus, silence becomes a sieve, separating the true from the false, the authentic from the dependent. It is essential to recognize that this walking away is not merely interpersonal, it is archetypal. It is a journey of Persephone descending into the underworld, of Christ retreating into the desert, of the shaman entering the forest alone. The empath who leaves is not merely rejecting people. They are enacting an ancient rite of passage, stepping into the underworld of their own unconscious to reclaim lost fragments of the soul. Silence is the landscape of that underworld. There are no words there, only symbols, dreams, and images that speak in tongues older than speech. And in that silence, the empath begins to hear what they could not hear before. The voice of the self, the guidance of the deep psyche, the music of eternity. In this silence, too, lies a warning. For to walk away is not an end, but a beginning. And the path inward is fraught with dangers. The empath may be tempted to fill the silence with new noise, to quickly replace old dependencies with new ones. This is why discipline is required. The silence must be endured. Even when it feels unbearable, it is in the emptiness that the true transformation occurs, just as the alchemist sealed the vessel so that no external elements could disturb the process. So too must the empath seal themselves in silence, allowing the unconscious to do its work. Only then does the transformation complete. Only then does the gold of the self emerge. And so I say to you, when you walk away, do not fear the silence. It is not your enemy. It is your initiation. Others may rage, may accuse, may attempt to draw you back with guilt and manipulation, but stand firm. Their voices are the echoes of their own shadows, desperate to avoid self-confrontation. Your silence will teach them more than your explanations ever could. For silence, like death, is the great equalizer. It strips away illusion, and what remains is truth. And truth, however painful, is the only soil in which genuine relationship can grow. And yet, as the silence deepens, the empath discovers that what seemed at first like emptiness is alive with presences. The unconscious does not remain still when given room to breathe. In dreams and in waking reverie, symbols begin to move. Again, archetypal figures, long suppressed by the noise of others' demands, now step forward to speak. The empath who once gave voice to everyone else's suffering suddenly finds themselves addressed by their own inner companions. It is a bewildering moment, for many do not realize how profoundly they have silenced their own soul in order to protect, to heal, to serve. Now, in the stillness of withdrawal, the soul speaks with a clarity that can shake the foundations of one's life. Some hear it as a child crying in the dark, a younger self abandoned when the burdens of others became too great. This is not mere memory, but a living fragment of the psyche, waiting to be acknowledged. To walk away is to re-enter that forgotten chamber, to sit beside that child and listen. Others encounter darker figures, shadowy doubles, distorted faces of anger and resentment, long disowned in the name of kindness. These are not monsters to be destroyed, but guardians of forgotten truths. They show the empath where boundaries were trampled, where power was surrendered, where love was confused with bondage. Only by embracing these shadow figures can the empath integrate what was lost. Silence is the doorway through which these meetings occur. The INFJ and INTJ empath, in particular, find that silence is not only protective but revelatory. Their introverted intuition, when freed from the cacophony of external demands, blooms into its true form. They begin to perceive the deeper patterns of their own destiny, the archetypal currents that have shaped their life story. Many have lived with an uncanny sense of déjà vu, as though they had walked through life wearing the garments of a prophet without understanding their own role. When they walk away, they finally stand before the mirror of the self, and the garments are recognized. This recognition is painful, for it reveals the magnitude of what has been squandered in service to unworthy causes. But it is also liberating, for the future opens with clarity once obscured. Consider a dream told to me by one such empath. They described standing in a vast cathedral, yet the pews were filled not with people but with mirrors. Every direction they looked, their own reflection stared back. At first they panicked, feeling trapped within infinite selves. But then they noticed that each reflection carried a different expression. One angry, one grieving, one joyful, one serene. And at the center of the cathedral stood a great silence, like a living presence, unmoving and eternal. This dream reveals the truth. The silence is not absence, but the ground of the self that holds all multiplicity. The mirrors are the archetypal selves within, each demanding recognition. To walk away into silence is to finally enter the cathedral of one's own soul. What terrifies others about your silence is that it cannot be manipulated. The empath's words could once be twisted, their apologies exploited, their explanations used against them, but silence is unyielding. It creates a void into which projections collapse. People who once relied on your energy now must face their own lack. They may rage, call you selfish, cold, cruel, but these accusations reveal only their dependence, their refusal to carry their own burdens. Silence becomes a mirror in which they confront themselves. Often, for the first time. This is why silence speaks louder than confrontation. It is not you who indicts them. It is their own reflection revealed in the absence of your energy. Yet, silence is not merely a weapon against manipulation. It is, above all, our medicine. To withdraw from the noise is to return to rhythm, to the slow breathing of the earth, to the heartbeat of your own depths. The empath's nervous system, long overloaded, begins to recalibrate. Intuition, once clouded by exhaustion, becomes sharp and luminous. It is as though the psyche has been waiting for this moment all along, eager to reveal treasures buried beneath layers of fatigue. In the silence, you may discover a creativity that had lain dormant, an insight that transforms not only your life, but the lives of those who will encounter you anew. Walking away is not merely an ending, it is the prelude to a creation. But I must warn you, the silence will not always be gentle. It has its storms, for when you are no longer drowned by the noise of others, you must face the deeper voices within yourself. Voices of doubt, voices of despair, voices that ask, who are you? Without your giving, who are you if you are not defined by others' need? Many empaths struggle here, for their entire identity has been constructed around service and sacrifice. The silence feels like annihilation, but this death of identity is necessary. The old persona must dissolve so that the authentic self may emerge. It is an initiation, as ancient as the mystery religions, as profound as any rite of passage. Only by enduring this death can the empath be reborn into wholeness. In myth, the hero must always descend before rising. Orpheus descends into Hades, Christ into the tomb, Inanna into the underworld. The empath's walk into silence is such a descent. Others see only the outer act, withdrawal, departure, absence, but within, the journey is vast and perilous. Dreams may become intense, visions unsettling, synchronicities overwhelming. The unconscious, once ignored, pours forth in torrents. This is the alchemical stage of Nigredo, the blackening where the old self decomposes. To endure this stage requires faith not in dogma, but in the self that guides beneath consciousness. Trust that the silence holds you, that even in darkness, the psyche moves toward integration. And then, when the time is right, something extraordinary occurs. In the silence, you begin to hear not only yourself, but the voices of archetypes that speak across centuries. You recognize that your pain is not merely personal, but collective. The empath's suffering is the suffering of the wounded healer, of Chiron, who teaches through his wound. It is the suffering of the mystic who feels the world's sorrow in their own body. It is the suffering of the prophet, whose vision isolates but also illumines. To walk away is not to abandon this calling, but to purify it, to free it from chains of unhealthy entanglement. In silence, the empath becomes a vessel not for others' demands, but for the wisdom of the archetypal depths. This is why silence speaks so loudly. It carries the resonance of the collective unconscious. It is not merely personal stillness, but an archetypal gesture echoing the withdrawal of every mystic, every prophet, every healer who has ever walked away to commune with the self. When you embody this silence, you join a lineage others may not understand, but at some level they recognize its gravity. They feel the archetypal weight of your absence. They sense that something larger than personal choice is unfolding, that silence itself is speaking through you, as it has through sages and seers throughout time. And in this silence, you finally remember something the noise made you forget, that you are not here to be consumed, but to become whole. Individuation is not selfishness. It is the only path to authentic contribution, for only a whole person can give without depletion. Only one who has faced their own darkness can guide others through theirs. Only one who has walked away can truly return. And so the silence is not the end of your empathy, it is its transformation. What once was porous and boundless becomes discerning and strong. What once was a wound becomes a source of wisdom. You no longer absorb others unconsciously, you meet them consciously, choosing when to give and when to remain silent. This is not the death of the empath, but the birth of the conscious healer. And so, my friends, I tell you, do not fear the silence when it comes. Do not rush to fill it with new distractions, new obligations. Let it speak. Let it teach. Let it strip you of the false selves you carried. For when you emerge, you will not be the same. You will speak less, but your words will carry the weight of silence behind them. You will give less, but your giving will be whole and free. You will walk with a presence that others cannot name, but they will feel it, and it will unsettle them, and it will awaken them. This is the power of the empath who finally walks away. There comes a moment after the storms of silence have raged and subsided, when the empath begins to notice something extraordinary. The absence that once felt like exile now feels like sanctuary. The very silence that seemed to strip away identity begins to reveal a deeper identity, one not bound to the expectations of others, but rooted in the eternal self. This self is not the fragile ego that clung to belonging, nor the persona that bent itself into pleasing shapes. It is the living center of the psyche, the archetypal core that knows what the conscious mind has forgotten. When the empath touches this center, they feel an anchoring, a rootedness, a profound sense of I am that no external voice can diminish. And from this anchoring, their silence no longer feels like withdrawal, but like presence, presence that does not need to justify itself. This transformation is subtle, yet unmistakable. You find that your silence no longer trembles with fear of rejection. Instead, it radiates with an authority that others cannot easily name. It is not the authority of domination, but of alignment with something greater. Just as the tree does not shout yet towers in its strength, so too does your silence speak of a life grounded in inner truth. Others sense it. Some are drawn to it with reverence. Others are disturbed, for it confronts them with their own lack of rootedness. You no longer need to explain, for the silence itself carries the message. I am whole. I am no longer yours to consume. I belong to myself and to the self that called me here. Dreams in this stage often shift, no longer filled with chaos or shadowy doubles. They become more symbolic of integration. Some dream of houses, once abandoned, now restored. Some of rivers that once overflowed, now running clear within their banks. Others dream of encountering wise figures, old men or women, luminous children who offer guidance. These are not fantasies. They are manifestations of the archetypal self, signaling that the psyche recognizes the new alignment. The silence has become a vessel in which wisdom can arrive. The empath, who once only absorbed others, now begins to generate from within. This is the turning point. From being a vessel of others' chaos to becoming a vessel of one's own wholeness. It is at this stage that the empath faces another paradox. Having finally tasted the sanctuary of silence, the temptation is to remain there forever, to guard it jealously against the noise of the world. Yet individuation is not isolation. The silence was not meant to entomb you, but to prepare you. Just as Christ emerged from the desert, just as shamans returned from the forest, so too must you eventually return to the world, carrying the gift of silence within. The difference now is that you return not as prey but as presence, not as a vessel for others' shadows, but as a bearer of your own light. You give, but not out of compulsion. You speak, but only when the words arise from silence. This is what makes silence so powerful. When it finally speaks, the voice is no longer fractured, but whole. But beware, the world will test you. Those who once fed upon your endless giving will seek to reattach themselves. They will not understand that you are no longer who you were. They may accuse, they may flatter, they may even weep. The empaths must hold their silence here most firmly, for if you return too soon to the old patterns, you betray not only yourself, but the self that labored to bring you through the underworld. The silence must remain your anchor, your touchstone. It must be the ground from which you discern what to allow and what to refuse. Without this, you risk being swallowed again by the same dependencies. The true test of transformation is not retreat, but the ability to re-enter without being consumed. I have witnessed this many times. Patients who withdrew, who found their silence, who began to flourish, only to return prematurely to old circles, thinking themselves strong enough, only to be drained once more. The lesson is not failure, but humility. The silence must be cultivated daily. Like a sacred fire, you cannot abandon it, for it is the hearth of your being. Even when you speak, even when you engage, the silence must remain burning within. This is what others sense when they encounter you after transformation, that behind your words lies a silence untouched, a depth that cannot be manipulated. It is the presence of the self carried into the world. At times you may feel guilty for how profoundly silence has changed you. You may notice that you no longer tolerate what you once endured, that you withdraw from conversations that drain you, that you no longer rush to rescue. This guilt is the residue of the old persona It whispers, "You are selfish. You are abandoning them. You are hard." But in truth, you are embodying compassion in its mature form. Compassion without boundaries is not love. It is self-destruction. Compassion, rooted in silence, is love that sustains. You are no longer giving from depletion, but from fullness. This is not selfishness. It is integrity. And integrity is what the world needs most. Silence is not only personal, but archetypal. And as you embody it, you begin to sense its resonance in the collective. You recognize that humanity as a whole is afraid of silence. We fill our lives with noise, with distractions, with endless chatter, because silence exposes. It forces us to confront the emptiness within, the shadows we deny, the truth we evade. Your silence, therefore, becomes a living symbol. It unsettles not only those closest to you, but anyone who senses it. They do not understand why, but in your presence they feel something. Stir, perhaps fear, perhaps longing. Your silence reminds them of their own neglected self. This is why it speaks so loudly. It is not merely your silence, it is silence itself, the archetypal voice of the eternal speaking through you. And so you begin to realize that walking away was never just about protecting yourself. It was about aligning with a larger movement of the psyche, a movement toward wholeness that ripples outward. By withdrawing, you created a void into which truth could rush. By remaining silent, you allowed others to hear themselves for the first time. By becoming whole, you become a mirror in which others glimpse their own possibility. This is how transformation spreads, not through preaching, but through presence, not through noise, but through silence. The greatest paradox of all is that when the empath finally learns to walk away and to dwell in silence, they become capable of true connection for the first time. For before, their connections were built upon sacrifice and imbalance. Now, their connections are built upon authenticity. They no longer seek approval. They seek resonance. They no longer bind themselves to those who drain, but walk alongside those who nourish. The silence within guides them like an inner compass toward relationships that reflect the self rather than distort it. And in this way, the empath, once consumed, become luminous. Their silence becomes not a withdrawal from life, but a deeper immersion in life's essence. I tell you, then, that silence is not the absence of voice, but the ground of the true voice. To find it is to find the self. To walk away into it is to enter the underworld of transformation. To emerge from it is to embody a presence that speaks without speaking, that heals without effort, that unsettles and awakens all who encounter it. This is the destiny of the empath who finally says no, who finally turns their back, who finally honors the silence that has always waited within them. The world may not understand, but the self understands, and that is enough. And now we come to the heart of the matter, the culmination of the long journey into silence, for silence, once feared as emptiness, once endured as trial, once cultivated as sanctuary, reveals itself as something more. It is not merely a condition of absence, but the living breath of the self. To dwell in silence is to dwell in the eternal, beyond the clamor of ego, beyond the demands of the collective. This is why, when the empath finally walks away and abides in silence, the world trembles, for they have touched a dimension the world itself forgets, and they carry that dimension with them wherever they go. Silence becomes their aura, their unspoken sermon, their unmistakable gravity. The empath who has integrated silence does not return to life as they were. Their very presence shifts the atmosphere. They speak less, but when they speak, their words cut through illusion like lightning. They give less, but what they give is whole, radiant with integrity. Their relationships change, for they are no longer willing to anchor themselves in the patterns of consumption and dependency. Instead, they move toward those whose souls resonate with their own, those who honor silence as deeply as they do. This is the beginning of true communion, which is not built upon noise or performance, but upon mutual recognition of the self in one another. Silence makes this possible, for silence strips away all masks. You may ask, what of those who are left behind? What of those who raged against your silence, who accused you of cruelty, who could not bear your absence? They remain where they are, in the circle of noise, until the silence itself begins to haunt them, for silence is contagious. It cannot be forgotten once encountered. Those who once relied on your endless giving now hear in the quiet a challenge they cannot escape. Some will resist, clinging harder to their illusions, but others, slowly, painfully, may begin their own journey inward, and thus your silence, though it seemed selfish, becomes a gift to the collective. By walking away, you invite others to walk within themselves. By honoring yourself, you awaken the self in others. It is a strange paradox of psychic life that the most powerful communication is often wordless. I recall a dream of a patient who described entering a hall where hundreds were speaking at once, each voice louder than the other. The noise was unbearable, but then, in the corner, stood one figure, utterly silent, simply gazing, and all the voices fell away, one by one, until only the silence remained. This dream captures the archetypal truth. The silence of one who has aligned with the self outweighs the noise of the many who have not. It speaks in a language older than words, the language of the eternal. This is why, when the empath walks away, silence speaks the loudest. The danger, of course, is always inflation. When one touches the power of silence, one may be tempted to mistake oneself for the source. The silence is not yours, it is through you. You are the vessel, not the origin. To forget this is to fall into hubris, to confuse individuation with superiority. Many mystics and prophets have fallen here, intoxicated by the authority, their silence commanded. But the true initiate knows the silence belongs to the self, to the eternal archetypal ground of being. You are not its master, but its servant. To carry it is a responsibility, a sacred trust, and the humility that grows from this recognition protects you from the dangers of inflation. For the silence will not tolerate arrogance, it will withdraw if you seek to own it. So the task is clear, to remain faithful to silence even as you re-enter the noise of the world, to cultivate it daily in solitude, in reflection, in dream work, to protect it fiercely, for it is the hearth of your being, to let it shape your words, your actions, your relationships, to know that when you walk away, you are not abandoning life, but entering into life more fully, life aligned with the self, and to trust that this alignment will carry you through whatever trials come, for the silence is stronger than the storm. I tell you, then, that the silence of the empath who has walked away is not the end of empathy, but its transfiguration. It is empathy cleansed of compulsion, empathy freed from bondage, empathy rooted in wholeness. It is the empathy of the healer who gives, not because they must, but because they choose. It is the empathy of the seer who speaks not because they fear rejection, but because the silence has ripened into a word worth speaking. It is the empathy of the one who has faced their own shadow, who has died to their old self, and who now stands reborn in the light of the self. This is empathy in its highest form, not porous weakness, but radiant strength, and it emerges only through silence. Perhaps you wonder, as so many have, whether walking away was the right choice. Perhaps the guilt still whispers. Perhaps the loneliness still aches. Let me tell you, the path of individuation is always lonely at first, for few dare to tread it. But in time, the loneliness transforms into solitude, and solitude into communion with the deepest layers of being. You are not alone in silence. You are accompanied by the archetypes, by the figures of myth and dream, by the eternal self that dwells within you. And as you live in this communion, you will discover others who have made the same journey, others who speak the same silent language. Then the loneliness will dissolve, and you will know that you are part of a hidden fellowship, the fellowship of those who have chosen wholeness over noise. The empath's silence is not a retreat from love, but a return to its source, for true love cannot flourish in dependency, in manipulation, in endless sacrifice. True love arises when two souls meet in authenticity, each whole in themselves, each rooted in the self, each able to honor the silence of the other. By walking away, you make such love possible. By holding your silence, you create the space in which such love can be born. And so your silence, though it cost you much, becomes the seed of a love more profound than anything you had known before. In the end, silence is the voice of eternity. It is the place where opposites meet, where shadow and light reconcile, where the finite touches the infinite. It is the womb from which new life emerges, the tomb into which the old life descends. It is the mystery that cannot be spoken, only lived. And when the empath finally walks away, when they finally surrender to silence, they enact this mystery. In their own life, they die to the persona, to the endless noise of others' demands, and they are reborn into the self, into the wholeness that was always waiting. This is why silence speaks the loudest, because it speaks not with the voice of the ego, but with the voice of eternity. So I leave you with this. Cherish your silence, guard it as sacred, let it be your teacher, your companion, your guide. Do not fear the accusations of those who cannot understand, for they are prisoners of their own noise. Do not fear the loneliness, for it is the threshold of communion. Do not fear the darkness, for it is the womb of transformation. Walk away when you must. Walk into silence when it calls, and trust that in doing so, you are aligning with the deepest truth of your being. And when you emerge, speak only what the silence has taught you. Give only what the silence has ripened in you. Love only with the love that silence has purified. Then your very life will become a sermon, a living testament to the power of silence, and the world will hear it, even without words, for when the empath finally walks away, the silence speaks, and its voice is louder than thunder, older than time, and truer than all the noise of the world.